Howdy, you delicious people. I'm here today to do my top 50 DC characters. So, a YouTube channel called Geekvolution, which I have been following for a very long time, had allowed me to be able to put a template together to put a video up to list off my top 50 favorite DC characters. Whether a lot of people would justify taking their characters as like, well, which is the most powerful, or which is to be like the best written stories and whatever the heck. Uh, However you want to slice and dice these characters at the end of it all. I want to go on and I just want to just rattle off my favorite characters that eventually I would probably at first want to be having a Justice League team of, and then eventually would get into like a Justice League Unlimited like thing. And at some point just be like, okay, like, man, like this would just kind of be cool to have these characters face off against these ones and so on and so forth. But anyways, with that said, like Geekvolution had wanted a top 50 character submission, and I already had gone on and done so. But I went back and then just kind of redid this list, and ultimately I had found through researching and looking more and just kind of checking into things, it's like, oh man, like I forgot about this character. Oh, I forgot about that character. And also, the list just kind of shifted and changed and whatever when I was to have gone on and just kind of redone it. So, like, this is to not be that exact list, but if anything, there might just even be more interesting characters that people have never heard of and can probably go on and check them out with certain animated shows or movies, or, of course, also the DC films if you've never checked them out, or DC shows, or comic books if you were to finally get into them if you have not already. So, because there's a wide range of like people liking certain comic booky like things. So, with that said, I want to say to everybody that I'm probably going to tick someone off, because really my number one is going to be drastically different than someone else's number one. If anything, probably people could be irksome by the fact that it's like, you should have had the strongest character as number one, or you should have had the character that is to be so and so. Why don't you have Superman on this list? Because I don't really like Superman. Why don't you have Brainiac or Metallo or something on this list? Because I didn't have a spot for that character because it's only 50 entries. Oh, well, still. Because, yeah, there is a lot of honorable mentions. I know a lot of people like a lot of Batman characters, and that's all you care about. And legitimately, I tried as much as possible to put a lot of Batman stuff in here, but also people will probably gripe about where Batman, in my eyes, is to be placed upon this list. I feel that also Batman, the Bruce Wayne version, has been used way too freaking much to the point of me wanting to go on and just wanting to see any DC stories without him physically in it. I'm exhausted with Bruce Wayne Batman. But I get it, like, this character sells more comic books than anybody else. But still, I just want a bit of variety when it comes to DC stuff. Like, I don't want to go on into a Justice League Dark story that has to just be carried by Batman. It doesn't make sense to me when there are other obvious characters that have supernatural powers, but it's still a story that's carried by Batman. It makes no sense. Anyways, so with that said, I've already gone on and talked for way too long about setting this whole thing up. So, letting you know now, like, actually, this DC list was far easier than the Marvel one. But I had to go on and have an assistance of a DC Comics Encyclopedia All New Edition. And that had gone on to help me if I was to be completely oblivious of certain kinds of characters or to have to remember who they are, because I've seen a plethora of different kind of DC animated stuff via Justice League Unlimited, as well as also a number of other animated series that was to be Batman Beyond or a rung of other things, Teen Titans stuff, Young Justice, which was to also have gone on and helped me with a good portion of this list also, because I'm like, oh yeah, like what was this villain's name within this show that I really, really liked, but like he's not even in this encyclopedia. What's his name? Who could he be? Blah, 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 and so on and so forth. So, I have to go on and state that there's also going to be a lot of honorable mentions here because there are certain characters that I really would have wanted to have put on this list. But again, only 50 slots. So, man, I would have put like Alfred. I would have gone on and put like Mongol, Gorilla Grodd, King Shark, King Snake. I would have put Trigon. I would have put a number of kind of Robins with the exclusion of Damian Wayne because I still hate that frickin' Robin. He's my least favorite. I hate him. Too much of that character has happened within the comic book and animated world, and just, man, I should like him, but I just don't. Darkseids and Brainiacs and a lot of just characters that really, when I'm going to go even probably through this list, I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't think of this character. Icicle, Mr. Freeze, I don't know if is to even have been on this list, but dang, he should have been. So many characters while going through this that I just felt horrified by the fact that I did not add them in, like a Cyborg, Wonder Woman. I am to just tolerate her in a lot of books, but I've never really seen a Wonder Woman book that I actually really wanted to pick up and read. Because nothing ever seemed entertaining enough. Supergirls, eventually there is to be like the Justice Lords or whatever, like the goofy alternate world versions of Justice League members that especially were on really good animated films. And also just like there's a lot of characters within the animated movies that I'm like, oh man, I should have picked this guy, I should have chosen this, I should have blah 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 blah. Vandal Savages, the list can just go on and on with a lot of these characters. Blue Beetle, because he feels kind of like an Iron Man character. Again, I don't want to get too far into this by basically telling you who's not on this list, but let's insist to just kind of go through in here. So, considering I already technically had put this list and submitted it, I'm going to go on and state that there's going to be certain things that I'm just going to have some wiggle room to have listed upon this list. There's like, well, yeah, yeah, I really wanted this character as number one, but here's also this character that is very similar to number one, and this and that, to just kind of like, okay, I'm not doing this 100% 50. And then also, I would have said that I was just kind of wavering on certain characters as well. To state that if I were to have removed this character, this is who I would have put. So with that said, let's get into this because I'm taking far too much freaking time. I'm taking 10 minutes to just talk about this whole entire list. So number one, it's Animal Man. Animal Man and Vixen. When Animal Man was to be a new 52 comic book, I was like, what the heck is the visuals of this thing? So I started to go in the book and I was like, oh my god, like, not only on paper is like the alter ego of Animal Man, just a really interesting character. This kind of action star like guy. But then you end up having him turn around and he is to have all of these powers of these animals within him. And then his eyes start to bleed. And I was like, what is this? What is going on? And so the more and more I was to unravel the New 52 Animal Man story, the more I was just fascinated by it, to where I was just like, oh my god, I need to see more of Animal Man. And come to find out, there was to be another character within the DC world that technically has animal powers that was to be called Vixen. So I just decided to just kind of toss that name here of a similar character. Vixen is to go on and I think have her own animated movie. I don't know why. But then again, Vixen through the Justice League, or no wait, I think Justice League Unlimited run, she was to start dating Green Lantern John Stewart, but like that eventually kind of really didn't go anywhere because we knew that John Stewart was going to end up with Hawk Girl. It was like meant to be. Even though there could have been a Hawk man in Hawk Girl's future, we knew that she was going to still end up with Green Lantern John Stewart. It was, again, a relationship meant to be, to have a future character telling John Stewart, hey, yeah, I'm your son from from you and so character. And it's like, oh, big reveal. So yeah. Also, this email here is to be a legitimate email that I use for business purposes. So, like, if you want to go on and have a collab or just email me for whatever goofy reason, maybe you have a question or something like that, you can reach me here. But if you are to try to spam it and whatever, you'll just be treated as spam. But anyways, moving on to number 2. Lobo. Lobo is just an interesting kind of space adventure character. If you are to go on and know how much I am to like characters like Cosmic Ghost Rider, you of course would easily know or understand why I like Lobo. Lobo has gone on to fight off characters like Superman within a number of just animated movies or the animated series, or also to be involved in other kind of animated shows. And I think he was in, like, I want to say he was in, like, Young Justice or kind of one of those team shows, but I'm not quite sure exactly what it was, and I'm trying to figure out and narrow down what it was. It may have had, like, a Batgirl in it, so that might have been like a Young Justice somewhere. But it just really escapes me right now. In the comic books, eventually Lobo was to make his way of being involved with some kind of like Green Lantern Ash-like stories, and I was like, ooh, all right, like eventually I should look more into that. And because I caught the very tail end of that story where I think Atrocitus was turning to Lobo, and it's like, hey man, like, you want to get involved in this? And Lobo's like, yeah. So Lobo is just an awesome character, and he has a lot of funny stories, and he's the main man. Lobo had gone on to wipe out his entire race, but then bizarrely, in a lot of stories, like, the entire race of Lobos just appear for some weird, strange reason. So I don't know what exactly is going on there, because it seems that whoever is to talk about those stories, like, doesn't talk about Lobo in its complete sense. So I'm like, what is going on with Lobo? Moving on to number 3. Number 3 is Ragman. Ragman was to have been on a Green Arrow show that was to be titled Arrow. He showed up in the later seasons, and also Ragman, when I was to look more into this character, like I found out that like this character has all these like rags from all these pieces, but then all of these rags would all of a sudden have him come up with these very specific powers. So if he was to have had a patch of an Olympic lifter, he could lift hundreds of pounds or whatever, like this Olympic lifter, because he had that one rag, that one patch that was sewn into his costume. Or maybe he was to go on and have a patch from a circus performer, and all of a sudden we now have Ragman who's doing all these flips and all these aerobatic moves just because of this patch, this little thing that he sewed onto his costume. So I was to go on and just be rather interested by Ragman and really want to go on and like read his books and eventually like see him on Arrow and just be really fascinated by him. Moving on. I know a lot of people will be asking, when is Batman Bruce Wayne going to be on this list? Hold your horses. He will be on here somewhere. Because that's all everyone cares about. But in all honesty, like, I do not like how much Bruce Wayne Batman is to be heavily used everywhere in DC stuff. But I get it, he's the big seller for DC comic books and DC content all together. But man, like, it is just so annoying. To just be like, man, it would be nice to not have a story that has to have Batman in it. To just give me a break from this character, even though how much I also love him, it's just like it just gets to be just too much. So, moving on, because not only are all the animated movies just really good, we have to just have him everywhere. So, with that said, let's move on to number 4. Guy Gardner, Red Lantern. And yes, I know Guy Gardner is a Green Lantern, but there was a story where he turned back into being a Red Lantern, and that story was freaking dope. Man, like, that story, I feel, really got me back into comic books when I was to start having disinterest in them. So that was to be like the gateway thing to just kind of get me back into comic books and have me start reading them, when eventually I was to again at some point fall off because of just budget things, or really just having like, man, I have to go on and get like 50 to 60 stories like every week and try to get all of these things from 2 different companies just so that way I can kind of keep up because I like all of these characters. But so yeah, like it just kind of became like too much, to the point of me wanting to just go on and listen to stories through characters like Comics Explained or Comics Extrain, who has sadly recently passed away. But then also just to find any comic book, either commentaried on, read, or whatever online through YouTube, just so I can be like, oh my god, all right, like I'm staying in some ways a casual comic book fan, but still like getting the gist of all these stories that are kind of coming out. So Red Lantern Guy Gardner was freaking dope. How he was to take out Atrocitus and become the leader of the Red Lanterns. Oh my god, sweet. I always liked Guy Gardner anyways, but then when he did that, I was like, oh my god, this is the freaking bomb. Moving on to number 5. Man-Bat. This should have been Batman. What the fuck? Man-Bat. I for how many times I probably think that Man-Bat is to be a disgusting looking character oftentimes, and when we are to go on and play a Batman Arkham game, there's to be one spot where you crawl up this building and the Man-Bat scares the crap out of you. What a jerk move that you do, Arkham. Still, I'm to just be like, man, like, every time I was to have gone on and done some Man-Bat, like, mission, like, it was to make me so freaking uneasy compared to everything else that the Arkham games was to deliver to me, and make me just go on and just be like, oh, like, you scare the crap out of me, Joker. You scare the crap out of me, so and so other character. But Man-Bat, whenever I was to do his missions and the Arkham stuff, oh, just made me just so ugh. But also, I liked Man-Bat when he was to have been in that God and Monsters animated movie, where he was to have actually been a superhero character, voiced by Michael C. Hall. Him and the Zod character, and I think the Big Bertha character, whoever that other girl was, I don't remember who she actually was. Yeah, the three of those characters were really interesting, and also that movie was dark and gritty, and it was actually interesting to see like a Man-Bat who is like being a vampire and killing all these guys. It was freaking awesome. Really like Gods and Monsters. If you've never seen that animated film, it's actually really interesting. But anyways, let's move on. Also, these early on characters are to really just be like, who would be my Justice League characters? Like the top 10, or like this would be like either my Justice League members, or would be villains who would kind of take on whoever this Justice League thing is. So Man-Bat would probably be a easily villain to this Justice League team. I honestly think Lobo would be actually a good guy in this story. Because I like him as a good guy rather than him being a villain. Come on, everybody. And Guy Gardner would be a Red Lantern, but still he would be a good guy. Because in the story, like, Hal Jordan goes to Guy Gardner. It's like, hey, man, like, I need you to just kind of, like, can you control the Red Lanterns? Like, we can kind of just work together. And Guy Gardner's like, okay, sure, yeah, all right. But anyways, moving on to number 6. Metamorpho. Man, whenever I'm to go on and somehow or another get Metamorpho, oh my god, is this character just like really interesting and cool to be placed in certain animated stuff, or at some points, like, he's just a really interesting character. A lot of people would probably say, like, man, you should probably have characters like Firestorm here instead of Metamorpho, or not. You'd be like, no. Because Metamorpho is to kind of play around with the elements. He's at some point to like use gases, and is to have an ability to just kind of morph his arms to be like hammers or maces, to be kind of somewhat similar to like a Sandman-ish, if you were to be a Spider-Man Marvel fan. Like, so yeah, like, he's this very interesting character. And for those of you who are just kind of sleeping on this character, he is to be used in stuff, I think called like the Outsiders or the Outlaws, or he's in a very weird, goofy team at certain points, and those names really escape me. But he's oftenly in like a bunch of like just team books, so check them all out, because really, Metamorpho, I think, is a good character that I feel needs to be seen more. Hopefully, at some point, I think he's going to be used in a new DC movie coming out. I would have naturally assumed. Moving on. 7. This is the Spectre. I believe this character had been briefly used in the Constantine show, but DC had gone on to do these showcases, and Jonah Hex was one of them. Green Arrow was one of them. Shazam, I think, was one of them, as well as Black Adam. If anything, yeah, like Black Adam and Shazam is to obviously be an honorable mention upon this list because I definitely did not put them in here. But there was also a showcase of the Spectre, and that movie was freaking awesome. To have a character that is seeking vengeance upon these people who had murdered somebody, and just the way that the Spectre goes about it was freaking great. If you don't know who the Spectre is, oh my god, read any number of books. I think the best one, honestly, is the Green Lantern one, where Hal Jordan becomes the Spectre. Oh my god, is that story just like one of the best in my mind of the greatest Green Lantern books of all goddamn time. Just when the three green or the Spectre and the two other Green Lanterns are just kind of sitting at this baseball game, and people are whispering their guilty things to Hal Jordan, and so Hal Jordan's like, dude, I gotta get out of here. Like, all these people are just whispering sweet nothings, and I can't enjoy this baseball game, so I gotta get the heck out of here. That alone is just so interesting and entertaining, and to realize like how this Spectre is to be this kind of one-of-a-kind like character that everybody should freaking get to know, and at some point DC should get off their butts and actually use this character in a meaningful way rather than have him kind of just be briefly in an Injustice book or briefly here or there in certain animated things. Actually have a actual show, a movie, a something with him in it, because a lot of people may actually finally go on and see this character and just be like, man, this character's freaking great. Why haven't they shown any bit of this character? But that's my frustration with DC and a lot of the characters they never freaking use. Moving on. Number 8. Green Lantern Hal Jordan / John Stewart, because legitimately, if I'm being honest, my favorite Green Lanterns are Guy Gardner and John Stewart, but I gotta also state that Hal Jordan, he's there in that list somewhere. Number 2 or 3. I didn't state Kyle Rayner, really because, like, his costume is never really cosmetically pleasing to me. When I was to go into his books were interesting when they gave him that story, that tale of him kind of getting all those rings all at one and him becoming this like amazing Green Lantern, because they have to figure out a way to make Kyle Rayner the most interesting Green Lantern, but it always miserably fails. Sadly enough, there's nothing they can do to make you like that character more. It just doesn't happen. But so, with that said, yeah, Hal Jordan and John Stewart have had their own individual animated movies, even though the John Stewart one was not that good. It wasn't good at all. Eventually, it got really freaking boring. But the Green Lantern animated movies are actually really good. And also, like, we do have the Ryan Reynolds live action one that I am just about. So, the villains are just disgusting looking, and you just have a very meh story. So let's move on to number 9. Anyways, Blackest Night was awesome. When they did the Blackest Night, Brightest Day thing, that was awesome for Green Lantern stuff. But eventually, I'm going to tie in some Blackest Night stuff anyways. Because I just like Green Lantern characters or just Lantern characters in general. But yeah, that Blackest Night story was, oh my god, that was another great story. A lot of people are sleeping on them Green Lantern stories because they are freaking amazing. Let's go on into number 9. Technically, this is a Batman. I'm warming you up to eventually getting to Batman Bruce Wayne. I get it. He's going to be on the list. Believe me, he's there. People are ticked. So, this is Batman Beyond, a future Batman that is to actually be Terry McGinnis and not Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne is to go on and be in the Batcave and be a grizzled veteran who is guiding Terry McGinnis through his missions, and eventually Bruce Wayne is to eventually pass away and get replaced by Dick Grayson, I believe. I think in the comic books at some point there was to have been Dave or Tim Drake or somebody else as Batman Beyond instead of Terry McGinnis, but no one liked that. So they just kind of went back to what they knew. And I was really happy with that because I was like, dude, don't have it be like one of the other Robins being Batman Beyond, because I don't like that shit. Like, no, it's Terry McGinnis or bust. Like, if you cancel those stories, freaking write better ones. Like, actually have a Batman Beyond story that people can get behind. Like, because it's just the same old with Batman Beyond. Like, I think it was interesting when they were trying to, like, put together some kind of future Justice League stories. But I think it was still not to, I think, have, like, the Terry McGinnis Batman in it. So it's just like, what is the point of that? I liked Batman Beyond's future appeal and its unique characters, even though they were trying to eventually bring in some familiar faces in some ways, like giving you the Joker gang, or eventually giving you some kind of flavors of familiarity. But yeah, so Batman Beyond is a great freaking character, and I liked the show, so check it out at some freaking point if you have not already, because you know all the DC stuff. Moving on, number 10, Clayface. Clayface is a character I would state that is the most underrated, probably not a character that everybody states so quickly when they talk about Batman villains, and I am so irked about that. Obviously, when you were to go on and probably say a Batman villain, the first thing that comes to mind is like, well, obviously Joker. But then the names that follow after that, probably none of them are Clayface. So I'm irked. I'm ticked because Clayface is so good. Whenever I've gone on to see him in other things besides the Batman animated series, I'm like, oh my god, like, you could get so much mileage out of this character. Why isn't he a villain, like a main villain that you see be like a leader? Or why aren't you seeing Clayface as like a consistent villain instead of just this one-off thing here or there? Like, he needs to be a mainstay. He needs to be a villain in a freaking film. I don't care if it's going to be really hard to do him as a CGI-like thing. Oh my god. Clayface as a villain in a film? Oh my god, would that have been dope. Freaking how he can go on and be other people, and then also, like, be this very menacing villain. Oh. Even at some points, Clayface is to be a good guy in some stories, like in the Batman. Like, he does kind of tote the line of being a villain and then also being a hero. So I'm like, man, you could have Clayface do freaking everything. And then again, what do you really have him do? He was also, I think, to have been used in the Harley Quinn show. Yeah, he was a stupid, goofy character. Because of course you have to have Clayface as a stupid, goofy character in a Harley Quinn thing. All the characters have to be stupid and goofy. What a waste for a really good character that should honestly even have his own show, but maybe not that version of Clayface. F that noise. Moving on, number 11. Control Freak. Control Freak is a Teen Titans villain that is to have his heroes go into a TV-like environment, a TV-like setting. Also, when you go on to Google search him, see the image of him, like the sash that he's wielding looks either like Chewbacca or looks like Worf from Star Trek Next Generation. So immediately I was like, oh my god, this guy looks like Worf. And he looks like Chewbacca. I'm like, God, this character just looks so, like, cool, even though he's very nerdy looking. But man, did I just freak out when I was to have gone on and watched Teen Titans and had this Control Freak character be the villain on that show. I was like, oh my god, they're tailoring this show to me. For me. Oh my god, you did it. I so much love Teen Titans, and when I got the episode of Control Freak, I was like, oh my god, I need to watch all of this. I need to watch the show, I need to watch the movie, and then when they did the goofy Teen Titans Go things, I was like, what the heck is this? What is this garbage? Like, is this like the Muppet Babies? When the original Teen Titans things was the Muppets? Like, the Muppets was the real serious thing, but then the Muppet Babies is just this goofy farting pig thing. What the heck is that? Yeah, it had Freakazoid in it, but still, like, what am I to just go on to Teen Titans Go for? Just for the goofy, weird cameo things and just the obscure themes that they go into every episode? No, I have a whole number of seasons of the other Teen Titans show that I can just watch and take that seriously, as well as also Young Justice. F all that noise. I'm not going into Teen Titans Go. Are you kidding me? Unless there's a Control Freak episode, then you got my attention. But otherwise, no, sir. No, sir, for today. Moving on, number frickin' 12. Finally. At least he's cracked the frickin' top 15. Be happy, everyone. Bruce Wayne Batman. In all honesty, I would have scratched out Bruce Wayne Batman to put Alfred in number 12, because that's how frickin' pimp Alfred frickin' is to me. That's how much I care about Alfred. I care more about Alfred than I do Batman Bruce Wayne. I honestly, it's not a joke. I would have legitimately put in number 12 Alfred instead of Batman Bruce Wayne. Alfred is a frickin' pimp. Give him the respect he deserves. Yeah, I would have honestly come up with a number of things besides Batman, but also there's technically going to be more Batmanish-like things within this list, as well as also a certain character that is to be kind of a knockoff of Batman, which is obviously going to be on this list somewhere. But yeah. Batman stories have gone on to always be, like, really great tales. Maybe not always. Maybe eventually there is to be some faltering going on. But if you don't like Batman, like, at least, like, some kind of something that you can gravitate towards, like, then you just don't like comics. Like, you obviously, if you absolutely just loathe the character, like, then you just don't get into any of this kind of stuff. So many people are to have finally watched a number of Batman movies for the very first time and just be like, oh my god, what have I been missing my whole entire life? Yeah, you have been missing. You need to go on and watch more of that Batman. Check out his animated series, his animated movies. Check out freaking Justice League Dooms and Wars and all of these things. Check them all out. All the early animated movie stuff, not that later crap that eventually they just chucked out there to make a buck. F all that noise. Check out Batman Under the Red Hood because god dang is that a good story. Yeah. Freaking that is to have been a reason why I had gone on to put a certain character on this list. Kind of. Got a little shoehorned in because there's another character that I just, by the way that this person is to look, just be like, yeah, give me that character. I like that character more so than I do this one. Anyways, freaking let's move on because I could just be ranting about Batman all freaking day. Dex-Starr Red Lantern. Who the is this? So, one, I'm going to have to pause here to showcase who this character actually is because I have a plush of him. So let me pause this video, I will get this out, and I will show this to you, who this character actually is. This is how much I love this character, that I got on to get a plush of him. Oh my god, Dex-Starr is freaking awesome. A cat Red Lantern. Oh my god, this is just awesome. Oh my god, yeah. A Red Lantern that's a freaking cat. How is this not the best thing ever? And he has a little tail ring. It's, oh my god, this was the best thing I ever got in my life. Dex-Starr. This is Dex-Starr. Oh my god, yes. Victory has been had this day. Yeah, when I was to have started to read the Red Lantern books, I had seen this character within them, and I'm like, oh my god, this is freaking pimp. That is a freaking boss character. And, like, that legit is the mascot of the Red Lanterns right there. I don't care what you are to say, like, oh, Atrocitus and this and that. It's Dex-Starr. Freaking boss character. Love him to death. And also, I freaking love the Red Lanterns anyways, because I loved that New 52 run. Moving on. Amazo. So, for those of you who may not be aware of this character, he's used in a lot of stuff. So if you haven't known who he is, he's used in a lot of things. He's used in the early part of Batman Under the Red Hood, where both Batman and Nightwing are facing off against him. He is to eventually get used, I believe, in Young Justice. And at some points or another, like, he is to just kind of be consistently used in a number of just projects that I can't even remember at this point because of how heavily he's used. But either way, Amazo is amazing. This character that can go on and when he's robotically connected together all of his pieces, because oftentimes, like, they are to have like had him like shipped separately, and then someone is to figure out a way of putting all the pieces together and then have him wreak havoc upon whoever superhero team. But yeah, Amazo is going to be able to copy every superhero's abilities, kind of like another character that I'm going to go on and have a list here that exists as well. Amazo is to be a robotic character that is to be a real true threat to any freaking character. So yeah, definitely go on and check him out. Amazo is freaking amazing. Going on, let's move on to number 15. Atrocitus, leader of the Red Lanterns. Yeah. Yeah, Atrocitus of the Red Lanterns, until eventually he gets dethroned by Guy Gardner. Through the Red Lantern comic book, it seemed that they really go on and focus on Atrocitus first to kind of give us his backstory. And I'm like, okay, this is sweet. And at some point, we do have the Green Lantern animated series that goes on and focuses on the Green Lanterns and Red Lanterns. So you get to see characters like Atrocitus and a number of other things. So if you don't know anything about the Red Lanterns, check out the Green Lantern animated series. You'll get to see characters like the Manhunters and the Red Lanterns and a number of just kind of other really interesting cats and things and whatever through that show. And it eventually gets really interesting to have a story where you're thinking that it has no involvement in the Red Lanterns, but eventually you'll realize that it's like, oh no, like this guy ends up showcasing that he is a Red Lantern. So yeah, it does tie into them. Interestingly enough, let's move on. Number 16 is Parasite / Black Alice. So Black Alice is just an interesting character that has kind of a very similar power set to Parasite. Parasite has gone on to be in a number of different kind of like either animated shows, like the Superman animated series, the Justice League stuff at some points in time. He's to also be a she within the Superman and Lois show, that CW thing. And also, like, he's purple. That's all you really need to go on to know. The Superman animated movie where he goes on and teams up with Lobo, I think Parasite is also to be a villain in that story as well. So yeah, there's that for you. For Parasite, yeah, like he's been used in so many things because he's such a good Superman villain that whenever you do get to see him, it's like, oh my god, this is going to be a great story regardless of how Parasite really actually looks. Because a lot of times how they design Parasite is to make him just look freaking awful. I like how they made him look in the early years where he was just this purple character that had just kind of some like grays or whites or whatever that color is, like mixed in. But they kind of make him look so much gross within certain comic books and whatever. But yeah, Black Alice is a character that I was to just go on and just kind of thumb through the encyclopedia and find her. So I wanted to just kind of state her because she looked very visually interesting. Moving on. Number 17, Dial H for Hero. So I feel that this character actually needs to get explained. So Dial H for Hero is to be all about an old-fashioned phone booth, or there is to be at some points this kind of dial thing that becomes a much more kind of handheld-like device. Almost comes off as like almost like a Kamen Rider kind of thing. It's so weird. But so let's just say, for a safety's sake, to easily explain this character a little bit better. So one guy would come to find this telephone booth, goes into it, and is to start to dial. He ends up dialing the word hero, or he ends up dialing other words, and eventually he ends up turning into one hero, then another, then another, and another. To all of a sudden have it to where this character, through a number of situations, are to have him become a number of different heroes for a very limited time. And really, I was to have gone on, the more that I figured out or found out about Dial H for Hero, the more interested I was. And also, Dial H for Hero has consistently changed into other characters. So Really, it's just whatever Dial H for Hero book you are to pick up and read. You are to legitimately uh, find other characters or to have somehow obtained this dial device that is to change them into a number of different kind of superheroes at some point, whatever is to really kind of help them. And eventually, I think that also was to help characters or guys, writers like McDuffie, come up possibly with uh, characters like Ben 10. But anyways, Dial for Hero is pretty awesome. He is to also be fairly similar to power sets like the Marvel character Legion, who is to be an X-Men character, and also had his own show at some point, a live action show. But if you have checked out the Marvel thing and then come here, you know what I've connected these two together. Moving on. I've already taken an hour to talk about this. Oh my god. This is gonna take a while. Red Lantern Bleeds. So, this is to be a female Red Lantern, and if anything, she definitely sticks out. She's to go on and have these kind of almost like bat horns upon her head. She's had like this kind of just black thing upon her head. Yeah, like this is to be the female Red Lantern, and she looks freaking awesome. She looks cool. And also, there are being plenty of times where it seems that Bleeze is to be kind of bejokingly connected to certain characters in what is to seem like a romantic thing, but it's all to just be a joke. Just like, oh no, 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 like we're not going to end up together, or no, 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 like this isn't going to happen. There is to bizarrely have been that joke for whatever goofy reason. I probably could have also gone on. I think Supergirl at some point does probably become a Red Lantern, I think, in some story. But, like, that is to be so brief or so obscure to my knowledge that I wouldn't justify having Supergirl in here as to be just a Red Lantern or whatever, because I just don't like Supergirl whatsoever. I had gone on and watched quite a bit of her Supergirl show, but I just like was like after a while I just stopped caring. So let's move on into number 19. Number 19 is Black Lantern Necron. This character is to, of course, be tied to Blackest Night, the Green Lantern-esh like story. So we would come to find that Necron is to be part of the Black Lanterns, and that is to be the Death Lanterns that are to go on and start to make all of these DC comic book heroes into zombies, and eventually bring a lot of dead DC characters within the DC universe of things back to life. Whether they are to have been from Earth 1, 2, 3, 7, whatever. Bringing them all back. Having them face off against whatever is to be left of the Justice League, because at some points, like, they kill off like Bruce Wayne, Batman, they kill off Superman, they kill off all of these characters. It's crazy, this story. They kill off a Flash. A lot of things are going on here. Like, it's almost as interesting as eventually when they try to do the whole deceased story thing that really just kind of steals a lot from a Stephen King movie called Cell. That's what they did. They just stole an idea and just made it cyborg. Whatever. They made it cyborg instead of cell phones. Whatever. But yeah, I always ever wanted to have Necron come back and kind of do like another kind of Blackest Night thing, but like when everybody is to have gone on and still be reading that Blackest Night story and don't really care about whether he is to ever be re-put into these things again, then it is what it is. So, moving on, number 20. Sports Master. This character was to have been in Young Justice, and whenever he was to be on there, I'm like, oh my god, this is basically like Casey Jones, but in a DC team story. Like, this is freaking awesome. So, Sportsmaster, eventually, within the Young Justice thing, we would come to find out that he's like a relative of some of the certain other characters within this story, which kind of makes for an interesting kind of play out with the history of this character. But Sportsmaster, I think, was my favorite character out of all of those Young Justice villains. And man, that is a hard statement to rationally put out, because there's a lot of good ones. Like, there's Icicles, and like there's all these other just kind of unique and awesome ones just to have been placed in that show alone. Man, but still, like, Sportsmaster was probably my favorite. So with that said, let's move on to number 21. 21 is Dr. Fate. He was the best thing in that Black Adam movie, if you had even gone on and bothered to see that film. But also, when eventually Dr. Fate is to ever get used, either in video games or because I had played DC Universe Online and saw that he was used in some story, it's like, oh my god, this is dope. If I could ever go on and have half of the powers that Dr. Fate has, like, this would be freaking sweet. If I could just look like Dr. Fate in this game, that would be freaking sweet. Just have his helmet just be, like, holding on to it for a second. Just so I can be just Dr. Fate just for a second. Just be like, yeah, I would turn into the crazy mess that would desperately just want the helmet back. But still, I would be Dr. Fate. So yeah, like, the helmet of Naboo would eventually have its person who is to put the helmet on become a crazed person, yes. But then also, the way that the Dr. Fate stories just kind of play out is so great. We would come to find that the helmet ends up getting traded from person to person to person, and eventually, even in Young Justice, they end up going on to having Zatanna's father wielding the Dr. Fate helmet, and I thought that was dope. But yeah, like, eventually that helmet, through just a number of DC projects, just kind of gets tossed around. Even in the Constantine show, there was a live action thing. They had the helmet of Naboo just kind of off in the distance as this kind of Easter egg like thing. They're like, oh my god, it's helmet of Naboo. And also, in the later chunk of Smallville, there was Dr. Fate in that show with a bunch of other characters, and I was like, oh my god, it's Dr. Fate. I was crying for years. So let's move on to 22. The Demon Etrigan. Regardless of how possibly not all that great that he honestly looked in a animated Batman film, The Doom That Came to Gotham, Etrigan, when eventually he gets randomly used in certain Batman stuff or Justice League stuff, or stuff in general that he ends up getting Easter eggingly involved in or whatever, I'm excited, because I'm like, oh my god, Etrigan, and he freaking rhymes still, and everybody has to really gripe on the fact that he rhymes. I had gone on to read this solo Demon Knights whatever comic book just to get more backstory or more whatever about Etrigan, and I was like, god, this character's so cool. Eventually, I believe he is also to have been used in the Justice League Dark animated movie. But yeah, love Etrigan. Really like this character. If anything, they would have finally gone on and done just really something with this character more consistently. But then again, like, how can you do a movie of this character? How can you do a show? Because eventually it would just look like really bad CGI, and also DC can't really pull off really good CGI whatsoever. They would have to do practical makeup or whatever, and I don't think they'd ever want to do that. So moving on. Oh, and Jason Blood is his alter ego, which is just a really cool name. I believe that's James Blood or Jason Blood. I think it's Jason Blood. 23, Static Shock. I had watched this show and legitimately been like, yeah, I like this character, and eventually he ends up getting put into certain Justice League episodes where there's just kind of some future stuff going on where Batman is like, Virgil, is that you? And it's like, yeah, man, I'm older, I'm this and that. It's like, oh my god, yeah. Static Shock is being used in other content at some points of time. Oh my god, this is great. Yeah, also, like, at some points in time, Static Shock would eventually get to have teamed up in his show with Jon Stewart. One and the same of them actually do. It's Phil LaMarr. Phil LaMarr does the voice for those two characters, so it was kind of ironic and funny how they finally got to do that episode. But then also, Static Shock was a really great show. Like, how it does kind of go into these like bang babies and all these kind of just interesting hot spots and interesting sonic booms or whatever kind of characters. And at some point there is to be like AJ from the Backstreet Boys that is to be bizarrely in one of the episodes, I remember. Yeah. Static Shock tries to do a lot of just interesting things within its stories, and eventually Static Shock's best friend at some point also becomes like his sidekick. So yeah, Static Shock is just a really interesting show that I think a lot of people are sleeping on. Plus also within the DC kind of way of which that all the characters are just really designed, it's nice to have Static Shock that is honestly so different from all of the other kinds of characters. So, and plus also to have him have like electrical powers. For me to have gone from like Static Shock to then want to watch things like Black Lightning because of Static Shock. Anyways, let's move on. Number 24, Firefly. So, Firefly is just an interesting Batman villain that at some points does get used in some of the Batman video games. He was almost going to be in the Batgirl movie as Brendan Fraser was to have stated that he was going to be the villain in that film. And I was like, oh my god, that would have been freaking dope to have Firefly in some Batgirl movie. God, why was that such a huge missed opportunity? But yeah, so whenever I was to have gone on and seen Firefly been used in anything, like, it was always just a really interesting or cool episode. Even though there was a lot of Heat kind of villains out there, like Heat Waves and Captain Cold would team up with Heatwave. But then eventually you also would have like Human Torches that are on the Marvel side of things and all that jazz. Yeah, there's and also Hotspot or whatever that Static Shock villain was. I'm scrambling to come up with some kind of fire characters, but yeah, there they are. Other than that, yeah, I got nothing. Let's move on here. Number 25, Catman, Catwoman. So I had to go on and legitimately go out of my way to research who the heck Catman was, because when scrolling through an encyclopedia at one point, I had found out that Catman was involved in a Suicide Squad story. So I'm like, who the heck is this Catman guy? And the further and further I looked into it, I was like, oh my god, like, Catman actually is freaking awesome. Yeah, his costume is cheesy, it's kind of weirdly colored, but I was like, man, if ever there was a time where, like, Batwoman would have used Catman, like, that would have been freaking off the chain. But there was never an episode where they used Catman in Batwoman. But then also, like, they could have actually used Catman in anywhere of the Arkham stuff, or really just, like, anywhere in the DC world whatsoever. It would have been cool to have Catman as a villain in anything DC related, because you could just have a lot of fun with that character. But it is what it is. Catwoman, been in a bunch of movies and shows and whatever. She's had her own animated movies and wasn't to be all that great and interesting. I'm surprised that they didn't do a Catwoman show. Why do a Batwoman show when you could have gone on and done Catwoman? But then also, technically, Catwoman was in the show Gotham. So I guess maybe they're just like, well, we've kind of done a lot with technically Catwoman, so but yeah, plus also I think they always wanted to just kind of take that character and put her in a movie rather than put her in a show. But Catwoman is awesome, and really, if I wasn't to be so jazzed about freaking Catman, I probably would have put Catwoman here. Because cat is a cat is a cat. Moving on. Number 26. The Creeper. A lot of people are going to go on and look at me very weird and just be like, who the is the Creeper? The Creeper is to be a revenge story-like character. At one point, this character is to be forced to wear this weird, goofy-looking yellow and red costume. And because of that traumatic event, this character is to go on and seemingly at will be able to transform into this yellow and red costume and seek revenge upon people. In a very goofy, weird-like manner, but again, it is to really just come off as to be very much the Crow. Reading a lot of the Creeper books, I was like, man, like, this is something interesting, as well as consistently going into a lot of YouTube videos to just find out more about the Creeper, eventually coming to find out that he was a villain, I believe, besides him just being a hero. We would go on and have Creeper at some points be involved in some Justice League animated stuff, where he is to just kind of be quick cameoed, but never really fully fledgedly, like, being really involved in certain stories, sadly enough. Just a bummer. I think you can go on and take the Creeper and make a really good movie out of it. Like, simple enough. Like, you could have, like, the Creeper be this college kid, and people pull a prank on him, and this guy goes on, decides to just get revenge on all of them. Simple enough story, easy to execute. Why haven't we done this already? You can make almost an entire show about that. You can milk it out for however it's to be really worth. But I think legitimately, like, it would just be like a quick one-off film, and then just kind of be done with it. Like, you could probably make it to be The Crow, where you just kind of keep making the Creeper movies, and have every time it's just a different Creeper, but it's just kind of the same similar kind of get up, the red and yellow, but just kind of just different in some ways. But it could be interesting. Could be kind of like The Mask was for the comic books rather than the Jim Carrey version, because I don't want a Looney Tune-ish looking Creeper. Moving on. Number 27, The Question. So this was eventually to be a character that was only really interesting to me when I was to see him in the Justice League animated stuff, where we would have him be tied to Huntress, and he would be this very conspiracy theorist guy who is going on and tying like world uh, like global warming with Girl Scout cookies, and like how are they all connected? Like uh, like this assassination is tied to the Hoover Dam. Like how could that have been at anywhere connected? It just is, believe me. And it's just like, what are you talking about? Like, yeah, this crazed man would just have all these conspiracy theories and he'd be like tying all these things together that don't make rational sense of how they're connected together. But that's why I just thoroughly started to really enjoy the question. And for how this character just has this very blank face, you don't see his eyes, you don't see really his nose or his mouth. And he's to be this kind of very old fashioned detective looking character that I was just thoroughly just be like, oh man, like it is amazing how like you don't even need to see this guy's face, but he's so entertaining. And eventually he ends up getting rolled into like a Lex Luthor story where like he's uncovering really how bad Lex Luthor is, and it seems that the Justice League are to look at question like, okay, this guy's lost his mind. Uh, but yeah, like when the question and the Huntress get tied together and they do that story, it's freaking, it's good television. It really is. Moving on. Also, I think there were other iterations of the question. I think there was like a female version of the question done in the comic books, and so yeah, so I would really like at some point for a lot more people to read the question and kind of do videos about it. So I could just be like, yeah, I like the question. You like the question? Great. This is awesome. Moving on. The Ray. So this is the original The Ray. I think it's to just state that I had gone on to get copies of the original Ray comic book and just started to read them because I'm like, you know what, this character looks so visually interesting. And then when I started to read the books, I'm like, wow, this is actually a really interesting story where we have a character that is consistently forced inside or indoors. And when eventually he is to finally make his way outside, we realize that that's how his power gets unlocked. And he becomes this other Ray entity. And he's to be uh, this character that is to kind of be this like star child or whatever, and he can fly and do all these miraculous things. And so I'm like, all right, like this guy that was just stick dormant and be worried that the sun could kill him, he goes outside and he just becomes a superhero. Freaking awesome story. And eventually they did completely change up the way the Ray looked, and I'm like, God, that looks like garbage. I think in the new 52 they tried to redesign the Ray, but I'm like, F all that noise. Like, yeah, you could say that the original Ray, like, he looked like a marching band looking costume character, but freaking, it looked a million times better than what they eventually changed him into being. No one read those freaking books. Man, like DC has made so many like failures and mistakes with characters that they had to just kind of re-go back into the original designs of them and try to just kind of resell them in other ways. I think the Ray may have had like, as well as a number of a team that he was tied to with with Uncle Sam. I think they had tried to go on and do some kind of other like animated project or something with the Ray, but heaven forbid I know exactly what that is or narrow down exactly what it is because I don't remember. Um, but if that is true, I would go on in a heartbeat, check that out and watch it. Um, but I'm not quite sure. If legitimately like if that Uncle Sam team that the Ray is on, if they did a movie about that, I'm checking that out. because all of that is just dope. I think I may have even gone on to like look into it, and I'm like, God, this looks like garbage. I'm not 100% all knowing about that, so I need to just kind of look into it. After this video is done, I'm gonna probably look into it. But moving on into 29. 29 is the Joker, obviously. A lot of people are just like, man, like, you're taking forever to get to these iconic characters. Maybe because I don't like the Joker as much as everyone else does. I just don't. Like, I can like Mark Hamill's Joker. I can go on and like Kevin Conroy's Batman. Like, I can go on and like a lot of visuals that the Joker has kind of gone into throughout the years. Like, I can like the Batman Joker, as well as also some comic book Joker stuff that they were going on and doing at some point. Every time eventually they were to give an origin story of the Joker in some comic book somewhere, I was kind of intrigued. But yeah. Eventually realizing that the Joker at some point was the Red Hood, but then became the Joker, and the Red Hood became another character. To me, also, I was to have liked the fact that in the animated Crisis on Two Earths movie, whatever that thing was to be called, both Lex Luthor and the Joker were actually good guys in the beginning of that story. But then the Joker had to go on and kind of be a distraction for the Justice Lords, or whatever they were called in that movie. And so the Joker was telling Lex Luthor, like, hey man, like, I'm down to my last joke. Get the heck out of here. Like, your bald head is hurting my eyes. Like, so Lex Luthor leaves, like, hey man, like, I appreciate this. And the Joker's like, ah, whatever. Like, so the Joker ends up getting killed by this evil syndicate, or whatever they were called. But yeah, I do like the Joker, but like, if anything, he's just very mid within this list. Sadly enough, because really, like, eventually, like, too much of the Joker is not exactly a good thing. And I think I've had way too much of him. To have him have been in Injustice God Among Us was a great thing. I like what it did to eventually Superman. But yeah, like they just kind of forced to come up with another way to have Joker within that story and within that world, and yeah, I just throw my hands up. When it comes down to the Joker, like, you always, for every Batman story, have to have it somehow connect to the Joker. And again, it just, you get to a point where you have to like just do a whole entire thing just about the Joker all the time. It's annoying. It really is. It's too much of one character, as also, to me, having to complain about Batman is too much of one character. But people like it regardless. But if anything, also, I'm sure Joker is number one on somebody's list, and it's not on mine. It just isn't. But anyway, but I can like Batman stories. I can like Batman books. I can consistently watch, read, and whatever Batman stuff. Like, it's just like, I don't like Batman characters like Batman, or like Joker, as much as everybody should probably think I should. Moving on. Number 30. Everywhere Man. So this character was used in the Batman animated thing, and I think it was voiced by Brendan Ralph, the guy who played Superman and Superman Returns. But yeah, Everywhere Man is kind of like Multiple Man. He ends up being able to multiply himself and be a number of different guys. So when I was to see this character, I was like, oh my god, this character is pretty cool. Because I was hoping that the DC universe would have this kind of character, but it's just kind of sad that this was like a one-off character that never ends up getting used anywhere else. And it would just be kind of cool if we had Everywhere Man used in other projects, but it just doesn't happen. Plus, also, if they were going to do a multiple character, legitimately, they probably wouldn't have had him be called this. Thinking about it, I also think that there is to be. I don't want to say like Wonder Twins because Wonder Twins is blah. Because I know that there was a Justice League show thing where they had twins and eventually like one of them like would transform into an animal and one of them would change into like an object or whatever. But also I think there was other like Zip Zap or whatever kind of twins that were to just be these really small little twin things that they would go on to like touch one another and then they would just kind of do this like running motion like thing. Was that on like Teen Titans or something? I don't remember what that was. But I don't know how that just came into my mind. It's probably not going to be a character that would have been added onto this list, but bizarrely, I don't know where that came from. Moving on. Number 31, Ultraman. So, I am never going to have Superman on this list. But I can have an evil Superman on this list. The only probably Superman that I would have on this list is actually Injustice God Among Us Superman. Because he has a lot of good points. And he also just kind of, in a lot of ways, just turns evil. So I can like Injustice God Among Us Superman. But anyways, I can also like Ultraman. For how he is to go on and be on that Crisis of Two Earths animated film. To be this kind of very mafia-like character. And also to have like an Easter egg of Ultraman eventually in Smallville. And at some points, us just kind of doing Ultraman kind of things with Superman and other just kind of projects. Maybe his name wasn't to have actually been Ultraman. Maybe it was to just kind of be some kind of other kind of. Anyways, moving on. Ultraman is really cool. Really like him. Great. Moving on. 32. The Hat, you say? I think the other character is to kind of match this one that is coming up next. So let's kind of go on and put them both together. Manchester Black. So now you're probably going to get really confused and just be like, what the heck? Like, who are these characters? So, both Manchester Black and both the Hat are to be in a group called the Elite. And these two are my favorite characters within this animated movie called Superman vs. the Elite. Manchester Black is to be the leader of this elite squad, and the Hat is to go on and to be able to conjure all these miraculous things and be a very interesting character. Manchester Black is to have these kind of just brain power Esh-like things, and at some point, we would come to find that Manchester Black ends up getting killed. But yeah, but I was to go on and really like Superman versus the Elite because of that team. I didn't really care about Superman. I also liked in the beginning of that movie that he had gone on to face Atomic Skull, which I'm like, oh my god, like the super villains in this movie are freaking awesome. But then Superman, like it is what it is with that Superman. But yeah, I really liked Superman versus the Elite, and it was lucky I went into that project because I normally just wouldn't watch a lot of Superman stuff. I just wouldn't. But anyways, moving on. Number 34, Harley Quinn. I have already gone into state that I'd watched the Harley Quinn animated series. But man, when Harley Quinn had gone on to do that, like I want to say it was like Rebirth, when they gave her a Rebirth solo book, and the very first thing that they gave her was like this zombie story. I was like, what the heck is going on? Like her and Red Tool, and her just being in a bathroom and zombies attack her or something, toilet seats and what have you. Uh, yeah, like that was just a really fun, interesting way to make people be like, what is going on with this story, and want to just check it out. But oftentimes, just Harley Quinn is to be kind of just be shoved into these teams, or to really, when you are to hear her consistently, it's again just kind of another annoyance kind of character. Um, but also, Harley Quinn is to, at some points, actually be written as well as also to really be some eye candy to where people will tune in to certain projects because she is in it, because she's probably wearing some skimpy piece, or she's probably uh, giving us an Easter egg of her past, or just doing something really interesting or funny within certain projects like Suicide Squads, or the Birds of Prey film, which it is what it is. If anything, I would have also liked to have put like Black Mask somewhere in here, but like for the life of me, like that was a character that um like in Under the Red Hood, he was like treated very well, but I just don't see enough of him anywhere. And then when eventually he gets used in like the Birds of Prey movie, I'm like, ugh, that was the worst you could have ever done with Black Mask, with an actor that does not fit that character at all. As well as the performance that doesn't fit the character at all, as well as just everything that just does not do that character justice. And I was just so upset by that. Moving on. Number 35, Robin Stephanie Brown, The Red Hood. So, if anything, instead of giving this spot to a Robin, I probably would have chosen the Red Hood, because I like the Red Hood out of all the other Robins. But there was to have gone on and briefly been a blonde haired Robin that was a girl. And I was like, oh my god, I need to get my hands on this comic book story, because I've been wanting forever, besides the Dark Knight Returns comic book story. I wanted to have a female Robin, because I was so sick of, like, you got freaking Grayson, you got Jason, you got Drake, and you got Damian, and you got all of these boys. Give me a girl, Bruce Wayne. Why do you always have all these sons? Give me one freaking girl. And then, spoiler, ends up becoming a Robin. And I'm like, heck yeah. Why hasn't this happened sooner? So yeah, so eventually, uh, briefly, we would have Stephanie Brown that, yeah, becomes a Robin, but goes on to turn around and become Spoiler again. And what she ends up doing in, I think, Batman Rebirth was freaking awesome. Like how she was to like kind of seek revenge and be a villainous character, and how that just story played out was just But having her as an early part of the story as a Robin, it was great. It was great to give a character that no one really cared about an importance for how briefly that really was in really just Batman stories. But yeah, but the Red Hood, The animated Under the Red Hood movie is freaking great. When it was on Titans, I didn't care anything about that show. I really cared about the first season. Anything that happened after that was just like, God, this is just getting so hard to watch. And also, like, I had to go on and try to review that show, and I'm just like, I don't want to review this. I don't care how well the show is going. It's just, oh, it's so hard to remember any of the crap that they're talking about because all I want to do is just every time they talk, just wah 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 wah. It was horrible. I didn't like the Jason Todd whatsoever in that show, and also just like I wanted another kind of Red Hood content, and they weren't giving me that. Like I had to seek him out in like DLCs, and eventually he was to be put into like Batman Arkham Knight, and I was just like I don't think I'm probably gonna like him in Arkham Knight either. So it's just like man, and when going through to just kind of check through the gameplay, like nobody really ever wanted to be like the Red Hood. Everybody wanted to be Robins or Batgirls or maybe Nightwings. Nobody really wanted to be Red Hood. And so it's just like, okay, well, this sucks. Um, like Red Hood is obviously the most cosmetically pleasing character. But anyways, moving on because I got a list to talk about here. Number 36, Poison Ivy. So at first, like this character was to be used as like a romantic or romanticized element to just kind of blow this dust and make people's hearts grow fonder for her. And eventually, the later and later that Poison Ivy is to get used, the more they better use her. They eventually have Poison Ivy kiss people and make them freaking zombies for her to use at her will. And I was like, oh my god, that is a better way for Poison Ivy to have an ability to just kind of zombify a lot of people. Like, that was good with Poison Ivy. And they figured out better ways to use this character, which was to make her much more of a threat, if not before, a real pushover or a person that would just kind of manipulate people in doing what she needed. So, over time, they made her a better character, but then Poison Ivy being rolled into the Harley Quinn show was just kind of like, whatever. Like, she's to go on and kind of be a romantic interest to Harley Quinn, but then also like Poison Ivy is to also be with the Kite Man. There's kind of a thing going on between them, but then there also isn't a thing going on. There's a lot of just bizarre-ish things going on with Poison Ivy and Kite Man, and like they're to, if anything, probably be friends. And I don't know. It's just very, it's a very odd show. And then also you have a lot of characters that are just bizarrely trying to be offensive in that show. It is what it is. Um, but I feel that Poison Ivy is just to have been better used in a lot of other projects besides that show. Moving on. 37. Who the heck is the Shade? The Shade, at some random points in time, was to have gotten really well used in Justice League episodes, to where he was to go on and kind of teleport people in certain ways and like use the darkness and like so this character was to rarely get used, but just the visual of him alone was just kind of really interesting. And I was just like, man, I want him on this list, even though he could honestly be the one character that I could have looked into anybody else being on this list besides him, just for how unrelevant he is. Like, I could have used the ventriloquist in Scarface instead of him. Like, I could have used anybody else Alfred would have came to mind more so than him. I could have used another Robin. I could have used like, cause it's I could have used Gentleman Ghost more so than him. I could have used Green Arrow, Aqualad, Aquaman, The Flash, Lex Luthor. Anybody else really besides him, because he doesn't really earn his spot. I could use the Mad Hatter. Anybody but him. But I used him anyways. So, the Shade, I'm giving you mad props because that someday maybe you're going to be worth me talking about him. Moving on. Anarchy. Anarchy, when I was to have played the Batman Arkham games, I'm like, man, this is a really awesome villain. And I'm waiting for him to get used in other things, but it just never really happened, I felt. So I was just kind of like, God, there is a gold mine with this character, and you can use him as a villain in a number of Batman-esque-like things. You could go on and use him in Batgirl, Batwoman, every kind of Bat stuff. Teen Titans, Titans, whichever. Like, you can use this thing anywhere. And you could have honestly had Anarchy as a big villain for an entire season. But heaven forbid you take the logical route and you just go on to be like, oh no, we're going to use this other character. And I'm like, oh, the obvious choice. Instead of Scarecrow, they honestly could have used Anarchy. It would have made a lot more sense for Titans to tie in Anarchy and Red Hood together. I feel that would have been a perfect match made in heaven. But they went with Scarecrow, and I was like, oh, okay, like they had to use like the fear toxin and a number of other things to kind of make Red Hood a much more powered up like character and whatever, and Lazarus Pits and all that jazz. Yeah. But anybody who is in Warner Brothers, freaking they need to use Anarchy in something. You know what? If you want to go and finally actually put out a Batgirl film, have it be Anarchy and Firefly as the villains. That would be freaking sweet. Because then also, if you were to have Batgirl with her social media things, like Anarchy would just be a thing for her to use to like, hey man, like I don't like the fact that these Anarchy guys are kind of running amok, so I want to go on and I want to get rid of them or get through them or whatever. How is it that we have gone on to not use these characters? They need to be used. Moving on. Blue Devil. So I had watched the Swamp Thing live action show, and Blue Devil was to have been kind of Easter egged or teased in that show or whatever. And I was like, oh my God, Blue Devil is in this thing? I'm like, oh, like, I went out of my way to have started to have read Blue Devil comic books, and I'm like, God, this is dope. Oh man. And I was like, man, I am pining away for someone to go on and use this somewhere. And then he was in Swamp Thing. I'm like, oh, great. But then again, he wasn't really used enough. Like, he wasn't really used well. And so I just had to be just satisfied by what they did with that. But yeah, Blue Devil. If you guys have not read the comic books of Blue Devil, or maybe even Kid Devil, whatever, yeah, like, I feel like you are, in some ways, missing out. Moving on. Batmite. So, Batmite is to, of course, be very easily compared to, like, Mxyzptlk, and, also, like, the Flintstones at one point kind of had, like, a Batmite kind of character. That would just kind of be whispering sweet nothings to whoever the main character they were tied with, which, of course, in the Flintstone things was to be Fred Flintstone. But Batmite would go on and be talking to Batman, and Batmite is to have been an avid fan of Batmite. If anything, in recent comic books, like Batmite and a bunch of his miter characters had gone on and been like used in a story, and that was freaking amazing. To where I was like, all right, like they're actually using Mitsopitalik and Batmite, and like it's a kind of mystery to be solved. Of like, okay, like who is to have been the Batmitish like character that is going on and kind of wiping these things out? Like, let's investigate all of this, and goes on to just kind of create a really interesting tale. Without fail, yeah, like Batmite, whenever he does get kind of put into these stories, it ends up getting to be really interesting. I think at one point, Batmite was to be used in Batman Brave New Brave and the Bold or something. Brave and the Bold, and eventually, I think that there is a Joker Mite or something that Batmite is to be kind of fighting off in that show. Um, but yeah, I think eventually uh, Joker, I think, ends up getting some kind of power, and he uses it to over and over and over again, just like kill Batman and then bring him back to life, to kill him again, to bring him back to life, and he wants to do it over and over and over, just because he's like, oh my god, now I have all this power, like I never want to stop just doing this, and like Batman just can't stop like not getting out of this alive. So it ended up just coming into a very interesting story where Batman has to realize that he has to kind of pitch in and help and whatever. But anyways, moving on, because I've already taken too long with this list. Superboy New 52. I actually liked the design of Superboy in New 52. The black and red kind of Tron looking thing was kind of an interesting outfit. They tried to really change Superboy within the New 52 so I could have appreciated him for that. But then they just went right back to where like it's it's to just be like the traditional Superboy, as well as also getting rid of Superboy altogether, to then just have the Jonathan Kent Superboy thing, which whatever. Um, what they're doing with Jonathan Kent's Superboy or Superman, whatever, whoever he is, really is just a lot of garbage. It's really a lot of garbage. He's to be forming this new Justice League. I don't care. Ugh, whatever. Uh, I don't like it at all. Um, but so that Superboy from New 52, and also what eventually gets used in Young Justice. None of that Titan stuff I liked at all with Superboy. Um, and eventually, at some point, there is a kind of a little bit of there is a Superboy episode in Smallville. But eventually, there is never a real like guy wearing the red S and black shirt. That doesn't really happen. They just kind of tease it, but they don't go all the way with it. Uh, but yeah, so Superboy in Young Justice is freaking great. How they came up with that character, and from start to finish, where they go with Superboy in that show is just awesome. I wish that they would have sticked with the white costume that he was given in his debut in that show. But again, they went right back with the black and the black shirt and the jeans and whatever. And I was like that is a total missed opportunity. You could have gone with the white costume, and that would have actually been so sweet. Maybe if you would have gone on with at least a white shirt, that would have been different. A white shirt with the red insignia? Just a nice little tweak would have just been all I needed, but whatever. Superboy, 41. Clarion the Witch Boy / Aqualad. So, These, of course, are to be important to me just because they were at some point in the show Young Justice. Clarion the Winch Boy ends up becoming a villain within the Young Justice show, and really he's to be known to kind of look like a Bond villain, where he has this cat and he's just kind of petting the cat, and he has these weird looking like hairstylish horn things going on. But man, was he like a really cool supernatural character to be brought into Young Justice to make us feel that like really the Young Justice team was going to have a really hard time trying to beat this character because he seemed really unbeatable and he was really awesome in Young Justice, as well as also Shazam needing to kind of go in between being a kid and being an adult so that way he can kind of back and forth just send messages to people. But yeah, Clarion the Witch, awesome character. Aqualad. Aqualad was a joke for the longest time until he was to put. He was a joke for a very long time until he was to be used in Young Justice. But then everywhere else, what a joke he is. Aqualad was to have actually interesting powers in Young Justice, and again, like that was the only time that a Aquamanish like character would be just like, man, all right. Like I could see this Aqualad becoming Aquaman, and eventually he ends up turning into a villain anyways. So like, man, what a huge missed opportunity. Like, I would have loved it if this Aquaman became Aqualad. Or Aqua Lad become Aquaman. I'm sorry, I'm getting all these things confused. Um, this would have been like this should have been what eventually Aquaman should have ever done in anything. But no, like we just have Aqualad who gets all the cool things, and Aquaman is just this boring character. It sucks. It really does. Aqualad was so cool in Young Justice, but anywhere else, boring. Moving on. Solomon Grundy, the Royal Flush Gang. I could not pick who was the coolest Royal Flush Gang member. So I just decided to just throw this whole entire team in here. But legitimately, I would have just stated that like Solomon Grundy was in number 43 because I like Solomon Grundy. Maybe not in Gotham, but like I like him eventually when he's in all these other kind of animated projects. The Royal Flush Gang is always to be a fun gang to just kind of be tossed into certain animated movies or eventually on certain shows like Arrow. Uh, Eventually, also, I think they were to be used in like Batman Beyonds and stuff like that. Um, and yeah, the Royal Flush Gang is always a really cool team to be used in the DC character things, but I can't go on and just say one uh, character should go on and be on this list. It just doesn't make sense because it's an all or nothing thing. So moving on. Number 44 is Toyman. My real knowledge of this character would be from the Batman versus Superman animated thing, or Batman and Superman animated movie, where Batman and Superman are facing off against all of these just kind of villains all at one time. And we would also come to find that like Gorilla Grodd is kind of controlling a lot of these villains. And so eventually by the end of all this, like both Superman and Batman are having to go into this weird, goofy looking half Batman, half Superman looking rocket ship space like thing. And bizarrely, Toyman is to have been the one designing this. And so he is to have this kind of a goofy joke about Power Girl and how she has huge, and then uh and so Superman is like, hold it there, kid. Like, do you realize what rating this movie is? So yeah, Toyman has kind of really been a wild variety of different kinds of characters through times and whatever. He used to be this just kind of genius kid, and at some points also he's to kind of be this adult looking kid and whatever. So yeah, like a lot of times it can easily get Toyman confused with a number of other kind of characters that look or seem the exact same, and I always kind of get them confused. So moving on, I think Toyman was also at some point used in Smallville against Green Arrow. When it was Oliver Queen, and there was an interesting just way that played out. Moving on, Despero. Despero was to have gotten used kind of a little bit here or there in some Green Lantern animated movies or animated stuff at some points. Uh, Despero, like, never a really big, heavy hitting character because of how rarely he's to really be used. Um, but I just like the visual of him, and I would always hoped that Despero would have gotten used a lot better, but it just never happened. So, with that said, let's move on. Dollmaker Ragdoll. So, one and the other to just kind of look visually interesting. Dollmaker was to have gone on and been used in the Batwoman show, as well as also to be voiced by Weird Al in an animated project. I think that was to be the Damian Wayne Robin Nightwing scene, and I thought that was really cool. Uh, but yeah, like, to rarely ever get to legitimately be able to see like a doll maker on any project, to even have him also get voiced by Weird Al Yankovic. I'm like, all right, this is sweet. But Ragdoll, don't really even know much about him. I think he ends up getting used in some kind of animated stuff briefly, but heaven forbid I can really retain any real knowledge of him. So, like, I saw him in a picture within this encyclopedia, and so I just decided to just chuck him on here next to Dollmaker. Number 47, Constantine. So Constantine has had his own live action movie that just kind of went nowhere. It was just kind of okay enough, very vanilla. Um, Constantine had his own animated movie, which was freaking awesome. And then they kind of tried to roll that character into Justice League Dark, and Justice League Dark was just kind of but they try to consistently do stuff with Constantine, even doing a live action show, which uh, just didn't have any kind of real budget. But like, the stuff that they did try to do was interesting. I watched the whole show, and eventually I would want to go on and rewatch Constantine at some point again if it seemed that there was real true interest there. But dare say, yeah, Constantine is a character that never gets his real trust and well used desserts. And I believe at some points Constantine was used in certain live action stuff after the Constantine show was canceled, to eventually shift him in being used in Legends of Tomorrow. I think he was at some point used in like an Arrow show, or something of that nature, that kind of had him like be like, oh yeah, we can use this character again in Legends of Tomorrow. And then eventually, by the time that character was kind of chucked into that show, uh, that show wasn't doing that well, regardless of what an additional character could really helped. Because really, at the points in time, they just kept adding characters, and they just made for a goofier, a weirder show, and so like that show, like from right off the pilot, just was like, what the heck is this? Uh, I had no interest in it. But moving on. Negative Man, Lawrence Trainer. So for those of you who had gone on to watch Doom Patrol, Doom Patrol was a really fun and interesting show, and then I would come to find out who Negative Man is through uh, certain animated things before even going into Doom Patrol, because Beast Boy uh, in Teen Titans was a former Doom Patrol member. So they would go on and talk about that in the Teen Titans show, and even at some points bring in Doom Patrol for like one last little mission with the Doom Patrol and Teen Titans. So those were really great episodes, and then at some point we would have Titans who would bring in Doom Patrol, or eventually have like Doom Patrol become an actual show, which eventually got more and more kind of goofy and strange and whatever. But yeah, Negative Man was just really interesting, coming more from the Teen Titans stuff than he probably ever was within the Doom Patrol actual show. Uh, because really all they ever focused on in the show was like, oh, he's a gay character, so we really just have to focus so much on that more so than anything else. How this character was like struggling because he was a gay character, and like that to me was just like, okay, we get it. Like he is who he is, and that's okay. And like let's go and do something else with this character. But they just kept harping on that. So it's like, okay, all right, like I'm fine with that. Okay, great. What are you gonna do with this character? Nothing. Okay, all right. Well. Okay, like I really liked this character. I liked his visuals, but you're kind of just doing nothing with this character. Um, like if anything, I was just kind of forced to like any other character besides him in that show, because they were actually either funny or they were really actually doing something in the show besides him. Sadly enough. Uh, but anyways, let's move on. Swamp Thing Psycho Pirate. So I was kind of back and forthing about Swamp Thing being used on here, because Swamp Thing, when you have him in the show, like or when you have him in his own show, or you have him just kind of being used seemingly anywhere, he's this uberly powerful character, because he's like a Groot basically. He's basically he's the DC equivalent of Groot. I didn't care to have Groot in the Marvel list of things. I used Man Thing instead because it's basically the same thing. Um but yeah, Swamp Thing had its own show as well as a number of other films, and Swamp Thing is freaking awesome. I watched the Swamp Thing show and I was like, oh my god, the stories of this is so underrated. But then eventually, like, it just started to become more and more that Swamp Thing was in the show less and less and less, because, like, they had just a really difficult time shooting in a swamp location. Like, it just became that the show uh, was spending too much money on the place that it needed to go into, and the show was just spending too much money. But eventually, when it turned around and was to have the Swamp Thing being showed on the CW, everybody wanted to watch it, and like it was like, well, hey, where were you guys before? Like, we didn't know that this show really existed. So at some point, the DC people or the Warner Brothers people are looking into doing another, it seems, Swamp Thing. But hopefully it does well, because I want Swamp Thing to do well. Whatever it is to actually be, hopefully it actually looks to be a cool character instead of some of the stuff that New 52 tried to do. I was like, what the heck is this? But I also wanted to read Swamp Thing just because it started to get tied into guys like Constantine or Animal Man. And I was like, okay, all right, like I can get into some Swamp Thing. I can try to get into the character, even though cosmetically I didn't like how he looked. Um, And then also they tried to add Swamp Thing into like Justice League Dark, the animated movie, and like they tried to use him at some certain points in animated stuff. Uh, but it was always just kind of like these one-off episodes, and I was like, okay, I guess I can just somehow just be satisfied that maybe Mark Hamill voiced Swamp Thing at some point. All right, great. Um, but then Psycho Pirate is to have been used in Batman stories, and they made Psycho Pirate seem very important for a character that really rarely ever gets used in the Batman stuff. It feels like they currently just invented this character just for him to seem important, but he never really ever was. Um, but stuff visually about him was really interesting. But then again, what could he really do that gives me any real care? But dare say, let's go into number 50. Detective Chimp slash Scarecrow. So I like Scarecrow in the Arkham Asylum games, uh, but then also like it kind of depends what Scarecrow you're really getting. There are certain Scarecrows where it's like amazing visuals, and then there's some others where it's like, God, that looks like garbage. And so Batman Begins did a really good Scarecrow, and also the Arkham games did an amazing Scarecrow. And when you go on and have Scarecrow, who has made the whole fear toxin thing, there's just a number of ways that you can kind of play around with that. Even making at some point Scarecrow, I would like to have hoped be more of a consistent Green Lantern threat than actually a Batman villain, because it actually makes a lot more sense. And especially when you would go on and see certain stories where Green Lantern is holding his lover and is to be so sad that she's to be dead, Batman would go to Green Lantern and just be like, "Hey man, like there's some fear toxin in here, and like that's why you're mourning this girl's loss. Like, hey, come with me because like this isn't really your lover who's dead." And Green Lantern was just like, "Oh, okay, all right." So, but also, I would have wanted to put Detective Chimp as number 50 because logically, I put Howard the Duck as number 50. So, Detective Chimp really ends up getting used in like the later parts of Injustice God Among Us because hey, they're just kind of running out of characters, and Detective Chimp was just this funny thing to just put in. So, oh my god, I've been talking for 2 hours about this. Why? Why did I have so much to talk about this for? But anyways, because I think all these characters have so many things about them that are just so interesting. And then also, I have a lot more to talk about these things than a lot of Marvel stuff because it's like, well, hey, it's either you know these characters or you don't. So, with that said, uh, so Detective Chimp is to have gotten rolled into a team that was also with the Blue Devil. Uh, and at some point, I had gone on to obtain those comic books, just like, man, there's a cluster of characters here. They're just really interesting, and I just wanted to see how that all played out. And so yeah, they put together some interesting stories. But yeah, so with that said, I'm just gonna get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody. I had already kind of submitted this list to Geekvolution if I hadn't already said this, so I'm just gonna go on and just kind of get out of here. And uh, if you want to talk about comic books, let's do so. I would love to be able to do comic book stuff on a more regular basis on this channel instead of having to always do movies and show reviews. If I can justify just doing a comic book rant instead of having to go on and do a review one day, that would be freaking nice. Maybe at some point I may go on and showcase to you all of my comic book merchandisable things, or maybe pull out. It's really far into my closet, but maybe I can start pulling out some comic books and maybe start reading them and reviewing them and just kind of talk about them on here. And again, instead of having to go on and need to do a movie and show review at some points. just to try and do something different on the channel for once. So goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.